We're starting a brand new series this week. It will be the last series of our regular season, and then we jump into our summer season. Hard to believe, even though it doesn't feel like summer's coming. It is coming. And we already have a lot of great things planned for summertime. We're calling this newest series, Live and Learn. And over the course of the next 5 weeks, we're going to look at 5 lessons successful people learn from life. 5 decisions that you will never regret. Sometimes these lessons are the fruit of years of experience and lots of practice. Sometimes these decisions are born of mistakes or failures or even misfortune. Sometimes they come from a sudden insight or an aha moment that can change the course of our life and bring about new levels of success, or simply save us from unnecessary pain and frustration. So today, we're going to dive into the first decision that you will never regret. And it goes like this. Stay focused on what's most important. Stay focused on what's most important. Now, we can think that we're doing that, but successful people have a different understanding of what's most important because they understand this subtle nuance to this decision that changes everything. They understand that life works inside out. See, successful people learn that the inner life drives the externals. Outside activities are determined by what's going on internally. And we know this to be true. We know it from all of our experiences in life. When you're driving a car and the car suddenly stops, what do? You look under the hood and you see what's inside, see if anything's going on in there. And if you're a guy, you pretend you know what's going on in there. If you find yourself sneezing and coughing and turning colors, what do? You go to the doctor to find out what's going on inside of you. Why do we do that? Because even though most of the time we're not thinking about transmissions and radiators, we're not thinking about our nasal passage or our liver, we know they're there. And they're determining how things are or are not working out for us. And what's true for our car and what's true for our body is also true for our mind and our hearts. Your internal life drives your external life and how you think and how you feel about life. Unfortunately, we don't always live that way, do we? We find ourselves saying things like, if I just got that promotion, then I'd be happy. If I could just get into that school, then I'd be happy. If I could just have that car, then I'd be happy. Now, of course, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be setting goals or work to improve your life. Not that at all. But I am saying that if you have your heart set only on external goals, anything from a dream job to a dream date to a dream home, they won't make you happy. They just won't. They won't make you happy if you're not already happy. See, successful people understand that only as they get healthy internally will life start working out for them. In fact, they've discovered the expanded influence that God actually wants all of us to have. The same truth even applies to our faith. And when it comes to faith, this is actually a huge problem, because we come to think of faith as primarily something that is like about sin management or behavior modification or devotions and rituals. See, lots and lots of people think that Christianity is all about staying out of trouble or checking the right boxes when it comes to our obligations. It's always a temptation, especially if you grew up Catholic, right? Good old Catholic guilt. It's always a temptation to think that God accepts us only based on our good works and our good behavior. That the sum total of Christianity is really all about religious rule-keeping. That's a huge problem. But it's not exactly a new problem. It's a problem that was addressed even 2,000 years ago in the letter to the Christian community of the Hebrews. They were falling into this sort of legalism, thinking that Christianity was just religious rule-keeping. And so, to get them to think differently, we read this. Christ did not enter a sanctuary made by human hands, a mere copy of the true one, but he entered into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. Now, let's just try to unpack this verse a little bit. The Hebrews, most of whom had been followers of the Jewish faith, considered their temple in Jerusalem to be an incredibly important part of their religious culture and life. So much so that able-bodied Jews had to make a yearly pilgrimage there certain times of the year for religious festivals. And yet, this verse says that the sanctuaries of earth are mere copies of something that is much greater. In the spirit of following Jesus or trying to be like Jesus, they should be aiming a little higher than the showy pieties of rituals and of rules. They should not be resting on what their human hands can make, but they should be striving for heaven. In the same way that Jesus didn't stop at being acceptable to other humans, but he went through the ultimate sacrifice and then he returned to heaven. And that's the feast we're celebrating today, his return to heaven. And guess what? He calls you and I to follow him there. And the Hebrews weren't just preached at and then told to figure it out on your own. They had the good example of people who were surrounding them and encouraging them in this. People like Paul, for example. Now, Paul had been a Pharisee, one of the religious leaders of his day. They were all about living the Jewish law to the letter of the law in an effort to gain or to earn God's approval. They were so focused on these externals that they lost sight of everything else, including the state of their own hearts. And Paul was the most extreme and intolerant Pharisee of them all. He believed so much in fulfilling the letter of the law that when the first Christians came along, who were also Jews and who had appeared to be breaking the law, it made Paul angry, and he wanted to kill them. Now, if you go back and read the story of Paul in the Bible, you can easily see that life wasn't really working out for him all that well. He was a deeply religious guy, that's for sure. But he was this incredibly angry man, too. And even though his life wasn't working out for him, he refused to change. Until one day, he tells us in another place in the Bible, God, who from my mother's womb set me apart, was pleased to reveal his Son to me, so that I might proclaim him to the Gentiles. So this one day, God stopped Paul dead in his tracks in a very powerful and effective way. He struck him blind so that he didn't have any other choice. He had to start focusing on the internal stuff. And in his darkness, and in his blindness, the Lord spoke to him. And the Lord convicted him. And it changed everything in Paul's life. God revealed himself in this way to Paul because he set him apart for a very special mission to bring the gospel to the Gentiles. That's the non-Jewish world. God revealed himself to Paul in order to reveal himself to the whole world. But only once Paul had changed internally was he prepared to undertake that work. And only then would he have the significance and the influence that God intended for him to have. Friends, that's the way it works. That's the way life works. And that's the way our faith works too. Internal growth and change precedes external impact and an expanded influence. So what do we do with that lesson? That's really deep stuff. How do we make that practical? How do we live that out? Well, first, I think you need to decide for yourself that you're not going to look for your happiness elsewhere. You're just not going to look for your happiness elsewhere. That's a decision and a discipline that you and only you can make. You have to decide that you're not going to wait for that perfect job, or the perfect spouse, or the perfect best friend, or the perfect anything, because the perfect anything doesn't exist anyway. You have to decide that happiness is not something that you can find out there, but it is something that God is working on in here. And just to sustain and support that decision, you have to make another decision. And it goes like this. You have to decide to invest in your internal life. Lots of things to distract your attention, but you have to decide to invest on you, on your internal life. Because you cannot support and sustain it any other way. And to invest in your internal life, you need a plan. Otherwise, let's face it, it's just not going to happen. You need a plan for getting away from all of the distractions of the external stuff so that you can regularly reflect and refocus. And this comes down to, I think, 3 simple steps. The first one is once a day, every day, you need some quiet time. You just need some quiet time. That means picking a place, any place that's very important, and then pick a time, even if it's just 5 or 6 minutes a day. That's not a whole lot. We can all sacrifice 5 or 6 minutes of our busy day to work on us. And then, once a week, you need more extended time. Time for prayer and reflection and renewal. And that can rightly be best happening here at Mass, but it doesn't have to be limited to here. It can happen any other time too. And then at least once a year, you need an annual break for refreshment and renewal, as well as recommitment to what is going on in your life. A reflection and a recommitment to what is happening in your life, which is what a vacation is actually supposed to be. But it rarely is that, right? How many times do we need a vacation from the vacation? What's that tell you? You're too busy on your vacation. Slow down. So maybe this year you can make sure your vacation is time for your own renewal. The reason the practice of religion sometimes seems so unnecessary, the reason so many religious people don't live any different than anybody else, the reason so many churches are absolutely irrelevant in their community is because they have it backwards. See, God wants to change our community, and He wants to transform our world. But He's going to do it by changing and transforming us from the inside out.